we've just got leaks of a new group grind zone, Dehkia Gyfin, which is interesting considering PA's stance on group content over the last few years. For quite a while, PA has been pretty adamant that players don't really want group grinds. But the community's reaction to this leak has been pretty positive, with a lot of players excited that this is something that they've been asking for. So the real question is, where does that disconnect actually come from? And more importantly, with Dehkia Gyfin, is PA starting to understand what players actually enjoy about group grinding? Or, depending on what the drops end up being, are we about to repeat the exact same mistakes that made group grinds look unpopular in the first place? Before we talk about the disconnect between PA and the players, we need to understand PA's perspective on group grinds, specifically party PvE grind zones. Based on all of their recent communications, PA has been very clear. They don't believe the BDO player base really wants group grinds. In multiple dev letters, including the ones leading up to Edania, PA repeatedly emphasized that Black Desert is built around a solo-first philosophy. They directly stated that Edania would focus on solo progression, and we know the final result reflects that, with essentially no group PvE content added in the Edania expansion. On top of that, every time global players asked our GMs about new group grind zones, the response is always the same. PA was working on Dehkia Miramok and Dehkia Gyfin, but since players reacted negatively to the Dehkia Lantern mechanic, those zones were eventually cancelled. Now, the big issue most players can already see is that these two ideas, group grinds and Dehkia Lanterns, were never the same thing. Group grinding existed long before the Lantern system, and most group spots have really nothing to do with it. However, the GM's messaging keeps tying them together, which suggests that PA believes they're killing two birds with one stone, since they think that players dislike Lantern spots and group PvE. And this is where the pattern becomes clear. PA's explanation consistently places the responsibility for lack of group content on the players. According to them, group zones aren't being added simply because the community doesn't want them. Now, to be fair to PA, group content does come with legitimate challenges. It's way harder to balance, more prone to RMT abuse, and takes more development resources than solo grind zones. If PA openly said that group grinds aren't worth the extra time and risk, that would at least be a clear design stance. But that's not what they're saying. The reason they keep giving repeatedly is that the average BDO player simply doesn't want group grinding. And that's why we haven't seen a true new group grind since September 2024, before both Land of the Morning Light Part 2 and the entire Edania expansion. Now, of course, some players do absolutely prefer solo grinds, and that's completely valid. But the idea that every player feels this way simply doesn't line up with reality. We can see this with how a lot of players were pretty positive about the leaks of Dehkia Gyfin and the possibility of a new group grind zones. Since BDO is a MMO after all, many players want the option to take part in content with their friends. Being able to actively play alongside other people is generally viewed quite positively in MMO games, rather than only being able to grind solo. Now, of course, not every player enjoys group grinding, but there are definitely many players who prefer this type of content, especially when it's optional. So, if players react positively to group grinding and are generally okay with having it in the game, then why does PA keep getting so many complaints about group content? There has to be some underlying issue that's creating these complaints and is making PA think that the entire player base is opposed to group grinds. Now, in my opinion, the biggest issue with group grind spots, and something that often gets overlooked, isn't the combat or the mechanics of the group grind zone. It's the drops that PA chooses to put there. For years, PA bottlenecked extremely important progression items behind group-only grind zones. Take Turos' Flame of Despair, for example. At the time it was released, not everybody was C20, and Fallen God Armor gave a massive boost to your DP. But the only way to get that upgrade was through a duo-only grind spot, Turos. That ended up creating a ton of justifiable complaints towards Turos. But players weren't complaining about the group grind itself. They were complaining about being forced into group content just to get a pretty meaningful gear upgrade. We see a similar problem today with a lot of different items, including the Merchant's Ring. One of the most efficient ways to get a certain piece is at Oloons, a 3-man grind zone. Now technically you can get it through trading or Ataraxian, but trading is effectively paused, and it's a lot rarer to get it in Ataraxian, and that also requires a 5-man party. Other than that, you can use the event paint to copy the Oloons drops, but other than events and grinding Oloons, there's no way to consistently get Oloons paint. So once again, players going for that treasure piece are pushed into a forced group grind that they may not always have a party for. Now, that really leads us to the core point. The frustration and complaints doesn't come from group grinding itself, it comes from bottlenecking upgrades behind group-only content. Even though I personally enjoy group grinding and it's the only form of PvE that I'll interact with, I don't think players should be forced to group grind in order to progress their gear or complete a treasure item. It has always been the exclusive rewards trapped behind group spots that have created the overwhelming majority of complaints. Now, looking from PA's perspective, they're constantly getting flooded with negative feedback about their high-end group zones, Turos, and Aloons. It can make some sense why they took a step back from releasing group grinds. However, what PA really needs to understand is that most of these complaints aren't about the group content itself, they're about the forced progression tied to it. PA seems to be misreading these complaints as players don't want group grinds when the real issue is the drops from group grinds. That misinterpretation is a huge part of the disconnect between what PA thinks players want and what players actually want. Now, of course, not every player is going to love or want to do group grinds. Some will avoid it entirely if they can. But there are more than enough players who enjoy it for the game to support at least 1 or 2 viable group spots per region or relevant gear range. The key is really making sure that no mandatory progression critical items are restricted to group zones only. And we have examples where group grinds worked really well. Old Mirrormock was extremely popular, not because it was required, but because it was fun, social, and really good XP. More recently, the Serendia group spots like Castle Ruins and Imps let players progress accessory cups in either a group spot or a solo spot. None of the accessory cup upgrades were locked behind group content only. Now, of course, there were some issues with Serendia, but that's generally the ideal design where players get a choice between solo play and group grinds. Now, of course, balancing efficiency of drops and silver per hour also matters. We don't want players who dislike group grinding to feel like they're earning significantly less silver or are grinding inefficiently. Obviously, if group spots make 50 to 100% more silver than solo zones, it creates indirect pressure even without exclusive rewards. But at the same time, group grinding shouldn't be irrelevant either. Finding that balance is crucial for whether players will actually enjoy new group content. Now, luckily for us, there are signs that PA might finally be catching on to the real issue. Not group grinding itself, but bottlenecking of core upgrades behind group-only zones. A great example of this is the change to Turos. Both the regular version and the Dehkia Lantern versions were popular duo grind spots, so turning Turos into a solo-only zone definitely felt like a slap in the face for players who actually enjoyed group grinds, especially since we already have so few party spots left. But at the same time, that change might actually indicate that PA understands why those spots received so many complaints in the first place. Players weren't upset about group content, they were upset about being forced to do it to obtain a specific reward. Changing Turos to solo could be PA quietly acknowledging that the real frustration was the flame requirement, not the group grind itself. So if PA continues adding new group grinds while also making certain treasure pieces or upgrade items obtainable outside of these group-only zones, then we could really end up with the best of both worlds. Optional group content that players enjoy without locking progression behind it. So this really brings us back to the leak of Dehkia Lantern Gyfin and why it matters so much for the future of BDO. We still don't know the exact drops or rewards, but this spot is going to tell us quite a lot. If PA makes Dehkia Gyfin an optional group grind with competitive silver, no exclusive treasure pieces, or mandatory upgrade components, then it would be a strong sign that they finally understand the core issue behind group grind complaints. But if they were to repeat the same mistakes again and lock a treasure piece or key progression items behind this spot, it'll show that PA still hasn't grasped what players are actually frustrated with. That's why whatever group grind zones get revealed next, whether at Calpheon Ball or beyond, will be a really interesting litmus test. It's the first real chance to see whether PA understands the difference between players disliking bottlenecked progression and players disliking group content itself. And that's something I'll definitely be paying attention to at this upcoming Calpheon Ball. At the end of the day, the health of group PvE in BDO comes down to one principle. Players need meaningful choice, not mandatory paths. As long as players are given real agency, the choice to progress through solo content or group content without feeling like they're losing opportunities, I think PA will see far fewer complaints about group grinding moving forward. Players really just want the option to decide whether they want to play alone or with friends. If PA implements group grinding in a way that respects that choice, it could be a huge boost for PvE in Black Desert. We'll just have to see what PA does next. But with that being said, I hope you all learned something from this video, and I hope to see you all next time.